All right. There we go. Okay. So we talked about, let me just say this again. We talked about how society has a number of leniencies in the law in order to facilitate criminals making amends. We have the gun buyback program. We have the tax amnesty that we read in text 14, and we have the infant safe surrender policy. Okay. In Judaism, what do we call a criminal or a person who did wrong coming back and becoming a better person? What is that called in Hebrew? In Hebrew, tshuva. Tshuva is a very, very powerful Jewish concept. Tshuva is typically translated as repentance. The more literal translation of the word tshuva is to return to your essence, to return to the correct path, to return to who you really are. Typically, the highlight of the year, which is Yom Kippur, is known as the day of Teshuvah, the day of repentance, okay? Let's talk about Teshuvah and let's talk about how it's done. Before we get into how Teshuvah is done, let's first explore an interesting case of a person who it is believed wants to do Teshuvah, but society, and especially the Jewish world, is having a very hard time accepting his Teshuvah. Let's bring this up on the screen over here, and I will show you the very interesting story of a lawmaker, a member of parliament in Hungary. I don't know if you heard about this story, but you can see it for yourself. Let me just, 1 second, make sure I got the sound here. Share the sound. Okay, let's see. Friends on Zoom, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound.
Trend underway in parts of Europe, a revival of right.
Excellent. I know. I'm going to put it higher. I just wanted them to first to make sure they can hear it. Let me put this here, and we'll put this here. I'll tell you what, this technology is not for me. Okay.
There's a troubling trend underway in parts of Europe, a revival of right-wing extremism that's brought with it racism, intolerance, and even violence. One man caught up in the swirl of controversy is a Hungarian politician named Chabad Szegedy. For years, he was a leader in the movement with anti-Semitic leanings. That is until he came up against his own past.
I am a survivor. He is a creator of the Nazi Party.
On a cold December night in Montreal, Jewish residents gathered to hear a visitor from Europe give a talk.
He created an atmosphere in Budapest that people are afraid to go on the street.
But not everyone is in a welcoming mood.
You know what? We are not embracing it.
I came over here to talk to him face to face.
One after another, audience members stand up, voicing their displeasure.
You can forgive, but you never can forget.
The controversial guest is this man, Chabad Szegedy, a Hungarian politician.
Nagyon sok minden van az életemben, amit ha visszanézek, akkor azt kell mondani, hogy nem helyesen cselekedtem, de az már nem az én életem lenne.
Szegedy was here to talk about that life, but he never did give his speech. Instead, Szegedy was ordered deported from Canada, taken to the airport, and escorted onto a plane back to Hungary by immigration officials. Rabbi Boruk Oberlander accompanied Szegedy to Canada.
Were you expecting this level of anger tonight? People were standing up and shouting.
They were really angry, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them.
There is good reason not to blame them. Until recently, Szegedy was the second in command of Hungary's Jobbik party, known for its extreme right-wing views. Peter Kreko is a Hungarian political analyst.
In 2006, we could see the rise of Jobbik party, which is an anti-establishment, anti-Semitic, anti-Gypsy, anti-gay party with a quite harsh rhetoric. They are quite outspoken against the Jews and against the Roma. They sometimes call the Roma criminals and parasites.
Jobbik is just part of a far right-wing movement sweeping Europe, marches, protests, and political parties blaming economic and social problems on familiar scapegoats, immigrants, Roma gypsies, and Jews.
Hogy egy radikális párt vagyunk.
Adam Mirkowski is a spokesperson for Jobbik and a member of the Hungarian parliament. When 16x9 asked him about the party and its anti-Semitic beliefs, he chose his words carefully.
Tehát, hogyha valaki ma Magyarországon megpróbálja bármilyen szinten kritizálni Izrael politikáját, akár amit Magyarországon tesz, akár amit a világon, akkor az rögtön ugye zsidó ellenes nácis.
Hungary has been down this road before. During the Second World War, Hungary's ruler, Admiral Miklós Horthy, allied with Nazi Germany, even assisting Hitler in deporting hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews to death camps. Today, the ghosts of that past are haunting Hungary once again. A bust of Horthy was recently erected in a Budapest square. Paramilitary groups are marching in the streets. And just over 10 years ago, the political party Jobbik was founded by a group of right-wing university students. Csanád Szegedi was one of them.
Jobboldali gondolkozású fiatalok voltunk, és úgy gondoltuk, hogy előbb-utóbb meg kell ezt alakítani egy olyan fiatalos, modern, radikális jobboldali pártot.
But Szegedi didn't stop at joining the right-wing party. He took things a step further, forming a civilian militia called the Hungarian Guard. For Hungary's Jewish community, the Guard conjured up terrifying memories of fascists during the Second World War. János Gatto is a Jewish magazine editor in Budapest.
Try to imagine Jews who are seeing people marching in black uniforms with Nazi-like flags. It's fear and horror.
The courts banned the Hungarian Guard, but members quickly formed another identical group. All the while, Szegedi's political profile continued to rise. In 2009, he was elected to the European Parliament, representing the Jobbik party. On the day he took his seat, he wore the uniform of the Hungarian Guard in what he calls an act of defiance. The escalating right-wing movement sparked a fire of racism in the country. Minority groups are feeling under attack. Hungary's Jewish community is one of them.
They have very, very clear messages, very harsh and very aggressive messages against Jews. I myself found myself on the front page of the most notorious Nazi websites.
Called kuruk.info and allied with Jobbik, the website relentlessly attacks the Jewish community. Activist Esther Garay-Edler was one of them. She organized this demonstration against an accused Nazi war criminal. The website struck back by posting her personal contact information.
És innentől kezdve folyamatos telefonos zaklatások, e-mailes zaklatások.
The attacks were often vicious, especially the emails.
Remélem szétbassza valaki azt a görény fejedet, az emberiség szégyene vagytok, zsidó mocskók.
They are openly and loudly against Jews and against Roma.
In 1 year alone, neo-Nazis murdered 6 Hungarian Roma in hate crimes. And neo-Nazi groups occupied this Roma village, terrorizing the community for weeks, while the authorities did little to stop the violence.
Úgy tessenek elképzelni, hogy 3 héten keresztül semmiféle kormánybeavatkozás nem volt.
Meanwhile, in 2010, Jobbik won a third of the seats in Hungary's parliament. But Jobbik and one of its members were about to receive a comeuppance. Csanád Szegedi, one of the most highly placed politicians of the right-wing party, was outed as being Jewish. It was a shock to everyone, including Szegedi himself.
hiszen az eddigi nézeteimet mind felül kellett bírálni, mind el kellett fogadni olyan történelmi tényeket, amiket én eddig nem kezeltem tényként. Most egész konkrétan mondjuk a holokausztra gondolok.
Szegedi discovered his Jewish grandmother survived Auschwitz, where most of her family died. After the war, she hid her Jewish identity. In 2012, Jobbik expelled Szegedi, alleging he'd engaged in corruption. But Szegedi says the real reason the party let him go was because of his Jewish heritage. The tables had turned, and so it seemed had the worm. Szegedi reached out to this Orthodox synagogue in Budapest and asked to meet the rabbi, Rabbi Baruch Oberlander.
What did he say to you when he first met you?
Like he was just waiting for us to give him direction and help him.
Had you heard of Chabad Szegedi before you met him?
Oh, sure. He was a famous name, or called infamous name.
What did you think of him?
Well, I thought of him about a racist.
Still, Oberlander's synagogue welcomed Szegedi. One of the most powerful members of a right-wing party known for its racist views was suddenly very uncomfortable in his own skin.
Azért van egy szégyenérzet bennem, és mai szemmel én azt mondanám, hogy igen, antiszemita nézeteim voltak.
Today, he is an observant and repentant Orthodox Jew, and he's taking his story of discovery, guilt, and redemption on a world tour. But when Szegedi was invited to speak in Montreal, many Jews and Holocaust survivors weren't in the mood to forgive and forget.
Surely there was one moment, above all else, that you would like to take back.
Avval is tisztában vagyok, hogy nagyon sokat ártottam a magyarországi romáknak, és nagyon sokat ártottam akár a zsidó közösségnek is.
In the end, he could only speak to them in a video.
Hozzá kell tennem azt is, mert beismerem, hogy nagyon sok bűnöm van. Ezért értem meg önöket, akik nem örülnek annak, hogy itt vagyok, de ezeket a bűnöket én megpróbálom jóvá tenni.
While one leader may now realize the error in his ways, Europe remains a continent under threat from an ideology that swept it once and is growing again.
Okay. Second, let's close that. All right. Again, we don't have to get into necessarily the details of what's happening in Europe. That's not the focus of our discussion, although it's definitely a fascinating topic. What I'd like you to do is turn to page 40. Let's talk about tshuva. Let's talk about what it would take to accept someone back into the community. I think it's important. So why don't you try to answer the questions on exercise 2.1, page 40. Would you be open to accepting such a person as a member of the Jewish community in good standing? Yes or no? If yes, what would they need to do in order to earn acceptance from you? And what might be the key elements in your mind of genuine repentance? If you have a pen, you can write these down. If you don't have a pen, we have a couple of pens in the back. If you want to just raise your hand and share your thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Go ahead, Norbert. Yes.
The concept of Chabad.
Yes.
Is it a human concept or godly concept?
So the question is the concept of tshuva, is it a human concept or a godly concept? And I believe the answer is both. It's a partnership between man and God. It's God, as we're going to see, God stretches out his hand and allows us to come in, but then we have to make the effort to come in.
Because it's like at Yom Kippur, our relationship is through God with God.
Right.
Not the community.
No, that's not the case. Yom Kippur is actually about sins between man and God, but also sins between man and man. You know, during Yom Kippur, we do the al-chet, right? And many of those sins are things that you did to somebody else. Not speaking appropriately, hurting another person, lying to another person, etc. A sin against man is also a sin against God, and before you can do tshuva between you and God, you have to first make amends with a fellow man. So back to the question, first of all, how do you feel about accepting such a person? What do you think they would need to do to earn the acceptance, and what are the steps necessary in order for a person to go through the process of tshuva? Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, you know what I like is, yes, what do you have to do to earn acceptance?
So what do you think you would need to
I
do?
like for him or her
Yeah.
to think about what they, I'd like to ask them what they would do.
Okay.
That's what I like to put them on the spot.
Okay.
I don't have.
And what do you think they might suggest? What are some steps a person needs to take after they've done terrible things?
Rent is closed.
Okay. Anybody? What are some things we need to do? Yes, Seth?
Is first admit that what we've done is wrong.
Okay.
One, to ourselves as an individual, and two, to Hashem.
Okay, so you're making a very good point, which is an essential part of tshuva, and that is to do what's called vidui. Vidui means to verbally acknowledge what it is that was done and to acknowledge that it was wrong. Okay, good. Anything else? Yes, Alan?
I feel a little conflicted over
This particular case. Okay.
Is that here is somebody who is an anti-Semite, who finds out that he's got a grandmother who's, and all of a sudden, it's like the past never happened, it's moving forward.
Right. I think that's what troubled a lot of the people.
I think what troubles people is we're talking about somebody who is vocally
Right.
open about his anti-Semitism.
Right.
It's not as if, well, you know, I sort of leave everybody doing their own thing and, oh, I found out my grandma.
Right.
This is somebody who is actively involved.
So I'm just going to repeat what you're saying for those who are listening online. What you're saying is it really bothers you. It seems like, you know, as long as he wasn't Jewish, to him, everything he was doing made sense. Everything was fine. And suddenly he finds out he's Jewish and then everything just turns around. Let me just clarify from what I understand in the story, and there's actually a fascinating, I think it's a 2-hour movie that was made about his life, because he's a very controversial figure. And the Chabad rabbi who helped him through his journey himself was interviewed in the film and is also conflicted about what happened. He essentially says, I'm not God, I'm not the judge and the jury. If a person comes to me and wants to grow and I feel that they're sincere, I will facilitate. The rabbi said, I'm not here to tell the community what to do. But I do want to point out from what I understand in the story, it's not like he suddenly just woke up one day and said, okay, fine, everything is good, I'm done. It was a long, painful process, including, by the way, being thrown out of his own party because he was Jewish. But it does seem that he continues to be part of the government, and he has now joined the forces of fighting this political party, fighting the anti-Semitism, fighting the other racism of his party. And I think what you see there is another component of tshuva, right? We actually see in Judaism, there are a number of very, very important components when it comes to tshuva, okay? Let's look at page 42, okay? In Jewish law, in Jewish tradition, we have 5 components, 5 steps in this process of rehabilitation, of going from a criminal existence to a pure rehabilitated existence. I should point out that although we gave the example, and it's a fascinating example, Ellen, you want to just move your person? There you go. Although we gave the example, and it's a fascinating example of this, I have a hard time pronouncing his name, this Hungarian politician, the Hungarian Nazi. Most people that we're talking about tonight are not Nazis, and they're not Hitler, and they're not Putin, and they're not the Buffalo shooter, and they're not all the other terrible, evil people that are committing crimes that are on the headlines of all the newspapers. What we're also dealing with, and this is most important to us and to the people that we deal with and to ourselves in the mistakes that we might make, is people who, for whatever reason, experience a moral failing, make a bad choice, end up doing something they shouldn't do, doing something that hurts another person, doing something they regret. And they sincerely want to go through the process that we call tshuva. And the question is, number one, what is that process? Number two, what is accomplished through that process? But most importantly, as it relates to our discussion tonight, because we did start with all the examples in secular law of things that we do to facilitate the rehabilitation of a criminal, including the examples of the gun buyback, the tax amnesty, the infant surrender program, right? What should we be doing as a society? To what extent should this be a value of ours? To what extent should it be our interest, not just for the sake of society, but for the sake of an individual, to help them become a better person, to make the path easier and smoother for them to become a better person? I'm not saying that we should let things go and they shouldn't have to go through the painful process, but to make it doable. To make it doable. Because often what happens in the criminal justice system is a person is facing so much in terms of punishment. The levels of fines, you know, we're going to fine them $24 million. Really? Okay. And then how's that going to work, right? So basically a person is facing a lifetime of just spinning their wheels because of what we pile on, and it's justice. It's justified. Okay. But the question is, what kind of a person are we going to end up with at the end of the game, right? That's the question that Judaism asks. But as we go into that, let's just look briefly on page 42, okay? So there's what Seth mentioned, the verbal confession, the vidui, right? This is not so much about talking to God, but it's the important exercise of not just thinking something, but actually verbalizing it. We know in so many areas of life how important it is for the person to actually say those words, right? And you know how often, for those of us that deal with children or teenagers, and you talk to a child and you say, do you understand? Yes. Can you tell me what you understand, right? And because you want them to go through that process of verbalizing it, first of all, you often confirm that they didn't understand and you have to go through it again. But even if they did understand, by saying it, it makes it real. It gives it a body, so to speak, right? It gives the tshuva, it makes it concrete, it makes it real, okay? The second thing is, we have to deal with the victim. In a case of a sin between man and man, where you hurt somebody else, so there's two things we have to do for the victim. Number one, if there were financial damages, we have to pay restitution. The person has to be made whole. Number two, the relationship between one human and the other was damaged, and there has to be appeasement. Okay, whether it's apologizing, whether it's expressing remorse, whether it's expressing, you know, literally saying to the person, please, can you forgive me? I'm so sorry that I wronged you. That's an important process that one needs to go through in order to do tshuva. They have to express and experience sincere remorse for their offense. And then finally, to make a resolution for the future, that this is not going to happen again. And often practical steps need to be taken, safeguards need to be taken in order to make sure this doesn't happen again. So just to throw an example out there, right? You have a person who was an alcoholic and they ended up with a DUI where they almost killed someone, right? So in their case, in addition to restitution and resolution and so on and so forth, the court might say, you need to go to a rehab program. You need to go through a 12-step program. You need to have something put onto your car where the car won't start until you breathe into a device and it confirms that you're not drunk because you almost killed someone, right? So there's the emotional and mental resolution that this is not going to happen again. And then often there are practical steps that are taken to make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, from a spiritual perspective and from an emotional perspective, from a relationship perspective, our sages tell us that there's an opportunity through tshuva for spiritually a person to reach an even higher level. Just like we see regarding a relationship, okay? You have a couple, they get married, everything is wonderful, everything is flying along smooth, and then there's a bump in the road, and there's a breach in the relationship, and there's an act of disloyalty, and suddenly the relationship is in jeopardy, and often the relationship falls apart. But sometimes the couple is able to find the resources within their love, within their relationship. The person who wronged their beloved goes through the painful process of these 5 things that we talked about. And they're able to genuinely repair the relationship. Often what you end up with is a stronger relationship, a healthier relationship than ever before. You know, just to give a physical example, you have a rope okay? And the two ends of the rope are, let's say, 12 inches apart. And then someone cuts the rope, and now they're separated, the two ends are separated from each other, and then you tie it back together with a double knot. Now the two ends are only 10 inches apart. They've actually come closer to each other, right? The knot, the retying process sometimes has a way of bringing people even closer. And so too, when we talk about our souls, our spiritual experience, you have this idea that the process of tshuva can bring a person to an even higher level. The reason why I'm talking about this as it relates to civil law, this is not a class about spirituality, is because it helps us understand that over here, we're not just seeing a Jewish value that is for the benefit of society, but it's a Jewish value where we're concerned about the individual, okay? Let's examine the cases, the examples that we gave earlier, the three examples that we gave earlier. The main purpose of the gun buyback program is that we're trying to get dangerous guns off the street. We're trying to get dangerous guns out of the illegal guns out of the hands of criminals. The main purpose of the infant surrender program is that we want a child to be safe. We don't want a child to be in danger. The main purpose of the tax amnesty, as we saw very clearly in the article, is that ultimately the government ends up getting more money. So it's a win-win for the government. Okay. What we don't see emphasized, although obviously there is this benefit as well, is what it does for the individual. This woman, this mother, could have ended up a murderer, and now she's just a woman who gave up her baby. This criminal could have ended up with this dangerous weapon, committing all kinds of terrible crimes, and now hopefully they won't do that. And this individual who wasn't paying their taxes is now able to live a more honest and above board system, above board lifestyle in terms of their responsibilities to society and to the government, right? So although there is a benefit to the individual, that's clearly not the focus in society. We're more concerned about society than about the offender, than about the sinner. Just one second. In Judaism, although we also care about society, but we're very focused on helping this individual person, this person who Judaism sees through the prism of you save one life, you save the entire world. You allow one life to be destroyed, you've allowed the entire world to be destroyed, right? The famous values of Judaism. This person is one of those singular individuals upon whom the entire existence of the world hangs. And we care about this person, and we will do whatever we can, whatever is within reason, to facilitate this person's moving away from a life of criminality and joining a life of a healthy individual in society. And that's what we're going to see now as we see the extent that Judaism suggests or mandates we go in order to facilitate tshuva, in order to facilitate a person moving on to the proper path. And that's an important point that we want to make tonight. Yes?
Two things. One, Bible, when you owe somebody money, you have to go work for them.
By what? I'm sorry?
You become a slave to death.
Okay.
Because you have to sell yourself and
Right.
you owe the money.
Correct.
Number two, who's going to, the guy can be a BS artist and say, yeah, I'll do it. And then he goes, I got away with it one time, why can't I get away with it? This is the money.
In which
part.
case? Which case?
The money. Let's say they don't give him fines and everything, because he hid it. And now he can pay off the thing without the fines and everything
Okay.
else. Says he'd be, all I gotta do is pay it back when they find him.
Right.
So now
And then when he does it again, they're not going to give him the leniencies. Right. I mean, there is a system to that. If you've ever been to traffic court, which I advise you to try to stay away from, but you usually end up sitting watching a couple of cases before it's your turn. And often, very often, the judge will be like, listen, I'll take off this fine, this fine, this fine, this fine, this fine. I want you to pay this amount, right? Or the judge will say, listen, this is the 17th time you're doing this. This is what you got to pay, or else you're going to lose your license, So there is an understanding in the courts of what your history is, right? Okay. So let's just look briefly. Let's look at text number 4, where we see why would there be such a focus on the individual becoming a better person, because we're seeing this through a spiritual prism of this is actually the purpose of existence. To go through a challenge and to overcome that challenge is actually the purpose of all of our existence. Let's look at text number 4, page 44. Why did our soul descend into this physical world if the ultimate goal is to return to heaven where it enjoys the radiance of God's presence? Prior to the soul's descent, it was also in heaven and enjoyed the radiance of God's presence. The true answer to this question lies in the sage's teaching. A single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than all of the world to come. Similarly, our sages taught that in the place where eternity stand, even completely righteous people cannot stand. Meaning, in a sense, a person who went through moral failings and challenges and overcame those failings is even higher than a person who never went through those experiences. Before the soul's descent into a body, it was undoubtedly perfectly righteous, but as a result of its descent, it can experience tshuva and rise to a height that is superior to that of the righteous. And therefore we find in the Yom Kippur prayers, you may be familiar with this, this is the opening prayer of Ne'ilah, the final prayer of Yom Kippur. We have the words, text 5, you extend a hand to transgressors, your right hand stretches forth to receive penitence, right? We have this idea that we stretch out in order to facilitate a person going through that process, okay? So let's get into some details over here. We're going to talk now about a concept that we find in the Talmud, that we find in Jewish rabbinic law, called Takonas Hashavim. Takonas Hashavim means the efforts that are made to facilitate returning to the proper path. Takonas Hashavim. The efforts that are made, the rules that are put into place to facilitate a criminal returning to the proper path. Okay? And there are a number of details that we'll go into here. Let me give you a hypothetical case. Okay? You have a person who's a criminal, and they're in the middle of doing construction in their house, and they need an air conditioning unit, a central air conditioning unit, and the contractor tells them this is going to cost you $7,000 plus, plus installation, and then the contractor says, I'm going on vacation, so it's another $5,000, et cetera, okay, fine. So the man's like, listen, this is a lot of money, I don't know if I can afford this. He says to the contractor, I have a friend who might have this, if I can get the machine, can you put it in? He says, sure, no problem, whatever you want, whatever works for you. He realizes that a couple blocks away, there's a guy that's doing construction, and very often they drop off building supplies and it ends up hanging out in his front yard for a couple days. So he figures, let me go by. He goes by middle of the night and he happens to notice there's a beautiful, fresh air conditioning system sitting on the front lawn, and he steals it. He literally picks it up, puts it on his truck, takes it to his house, tells the contractor, here we go. Contractor installs it. Wonderful. He has his new house, he has his new air conditioning system, everything is great. And he does this in different instances. He's a criminal, he's a petty criminal. He's literally stealing from other people, right? Years go by, and maybe he gets caught, maybe he doesn't get caught, maybe he comes to a Torah class and he has a feeling that he wants to become a better person, maybe he hears a good sermon on Yom Kippur, whatever it is, maybe he meets a nice woman who enlightens him and teaches him how to be a mensch. A lot of opportunities in life. And he realizes what a terrible person he's been. And he wants to change. He wants to become a better person. And he realizes that one of the things he needs to do is he needs to make amends for the theft that he committed, including specifically the theft of that air conditioner. Okay? So the question is like this. According to civil law, what does he need to do? He has to pay for the damage that he caused that individual. Whether it was the cost of the air conditioner, the cost of the delivery of the air conditioner, maybe the contractor charged him for a couple of days of work lost because the air conditioner wasn't there. You add it all up, you figure it out, maybe the court will add on a fine or two, you pay it, okay? In Judaism, we find an interesting law. In Judaism, the Torah says that when you steal an item, if the item still exists, you have to give back the item that you stole. You have to return the item that you stole. It's actually a verse in the Torah. Let's look it up. There's a verse in the Torah, text 6. We have this quoted from Maimonides, okay? And Maimonides tells us the extent to which, the ridiculous, so to speak, seemingly ridiculous extent to which this law would go according to the scripture. A thief, text 6, page 49. A thief is obligated to return the exact object that he stole. As the verse states, They must return the object that they have stolen. If the stolen object was lost or altered, the thief must pay its value. So if it is extant, if it still is in existence, you have to give back the actual item. If not, then you pay the value of the item. Now, Maimonides gives a hypothetical example, which we're going to see soon is not the law, but he tells us at first the extent to which this law could go until the rabbis instituted Takanas Hashavin, the laws that help facilitate tshuva. Let's see. Even if a person stole a beam and used it in the construction of his home, okay, right here, boom, it's holding up my whole house, okay? Scriptural law, I didn't steal this, I'm just giving you an example. Scriptural law would require that the thief tear down the entire building to return the beam to its owner because the beam itself is extant and unchanged. Now, before we go into what the rabbis changed over here, let's try to hypothesize why would the Torah want the actual item to be returned, right? The commentaries struggle with this. If an air conditioner is worth $7,000 plus whatever other costs there were, then give him the $7,000. Hypothetically speaking, he has to literally go and take his air conditioner out of his home, rip the whole thing out and give it. I mean, come on, it doesn't make any sense. So there's a couple of points over here, okay? First of all, in Judaism, and we're going to talk about this a lot more in lesson number 5, Judaism sees ownership in a very different way than secular society sees ownership. Ownership in secular society is utilitarian. There's no essential connection between you and the things that you own. It's utilitarian, right? Basically, if there wasn't the concept of ownership, then there wouldn't be capitalism, there wouldn't be commerce, there wouldn't be the whole concept of earning things, and it would just be it would be a big jungle. And so at some point, as humans spread throughout the world, they developed a concept called ownership. But it's not a real concept, it's not an essential concept, it's a utilitarian concept. It's a concept that helps society behave itself. Judaism sees ownership as something essential, as something real, and even something spiritual. And again, we'll talk about this in great detail in lesson number 5, how there's almost like a soul connection between you and the things you own. A responsibility, a spiritual responsibility of how you treat your possessions, what you do with your possessions, and how literally, if you think of all the people in the world have to collectively make the world into a better place, the things that you own is your to-do list for life. These are the things that I have to work with, that I have to start with. It's my home that I have to turn into a vehicle for goodness. It's my car that I have to turn into a vehicle for goodness, no pun intended, okay? That's the concept of ownership. So based on that, if you take something from someone's property, spiritually, not every house is the same, not every car is the same, and not every air conditioner is the same, okay? So this was his air conditioner, it has to go back to his property. Again, this is the concept, okay? Another point which the commentaries say is that a thief who does tshuva, who repents, but every time he turns on his air conditioner, he knows, oh, that's the air conditioner I stole. Yes, I paid for it, but I stole that air conditioner. It's not a healthy thing to constantly be reminded of your sins, to constantly be reminded of your misdeeds, right? We're told, don't remind someone else of their misdeeds. It's also not good to do that to yourself. It's not healthy to have that object of your shame, of your guilt in your possession. So the Torah says, if at all possible, get rid of it. Even if it's expensive, get it out of your possession, okay? Number 3, we know that not all objects are the same. Sometimes a person could steal something, and that object, even though monetarily it's the same, but it was my grandmother's piece of jewelry. It has sentimental value. And so we don't know when something has unique value or not. And therefore, as a general rule, the Torah says, give back what you stole. Give back the object that you stole. Okay, now, the problem is, and let me just clarify one more thing. Generally speaking, we have a rule, okay? If something is in the Torah, the rabbis, even the Supreme Court of Judaism, the Sanhedrin, the High Court, does not have license to go ahead and just change the laws, okay? So they can add to the laws. They can say, biblically, it's milk and meat. Rabbinically, we're going to say it's also chicken and meat. That's forbidden. Okay, so that's adding an additional rabbinic law. What they can't do is say, biblically, you're supposed to have one mezuzah on your door. We're going to add a second mezuzah on every door. No, you can't do that. They also can't take away. They can't say, biblically, you have 4 portions in your tefillin, but it's 2022, we can suffice with 3. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay, the rabbis can't just fool with the Torah. But there is an exception. That's when it comes to ritual law. Ritual law is spiritual. This is the way God set it up. The rabbis can't just tamper with it. When it comes to civil law, when it comes to monetary matters, the Torah recognizes that societies change and people change and the customs of the particular locale change. And therefore, in the Torah, it says that when it comes to these details and these laws, the rabbis are given license to alter things and to change things as they see fit. So we're going to see here a case where the rabbis saw that although for idealistic reasons and for good reasons, the Torah said, you steal something, the actual object has to go back. But practically speaking, what that's doing is it's keeping people from coming forward and doing tshuva because of how unpractical or impractical it is often to actually return the thing that was taken. So let's see now that actual law.
The buyback plan that you were talking about?
I'm sorry?
Doesn't that all relate to the buyback plan?
To the buyback plan? I don't.
In other words,
Okay.
you have a gun.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
able to give the gun
But-
without any question. You have a child, you're able to give the child over.
Yes, Seth. It is related in the sense that it's society making restitution easier.
Okay.
But it's different in the sense that you're not giving the gun back to a person that you took it from. You're giving the gun to the police, to the government, okay? But it is the same concept. Let's see it now inside. Text number 7, page 50. Yes, yeah, go ahead.
The issue of returning the air conditioning, or in this case, the example, when you tear down your house and return the beam. The individual who had it stolen from has moved on also.
Right.
So they don't need that beam.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
They don't need the air conditioning anymore. So now you're dropping off this $7,000
Yes.
piece of junk.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought it up, okay? Even in cases, and it's unusual because we're going to see there's a bunch of exceptions, even in cases where the Torah does say you have to return the actual object, that's only if the victim wants the object back. It's only if he's asking for it, okay? Meaning in all cases of monetary disputes, okay, an agreement between two people, as long as it was made with sound mind and there wasn't any misleading information, an agreement between two people is binding. If two people agree to something that's a monetary agreement, it's binding, no problem, okay? So even though perhaps scripturally he has to give back the actual air conditioner, but if the guy says, listen, my friend, you know, that air conditioner is 10 years old. I'm not interested in your air conditioner. Keep your air conditioner, write me a check for $5,000 and we're done, okay? 100%, that's the case. The question is, if he's demanding, I want the object that you stole, then the question is, do we enforce that? So scripturally, seemingly, we would enforce it. Here we're going to have some exceptions. Okay, let's look at some exceptions. Yeah.
Another question regarding that. What happens if the victim is unwilling to create an opportunity for restitution?
What happens if the victim is unwilling to create an opportunity of restitution?
Like, oh, I don't want the air conditioner back, but give me $15,000.
Right.
And
So
it doesn't create a reasonable situation so that the perpetrator can actually do something.
So
I'm sure that happens.
so what you're saying is, what happens if the victim is being unreasonable and making demands that are unreasonable? So the courts are only going to enforce, both the secular courts and the Jewish courts, if it's a case of Jewish courts. You know, we discussed last week, and it's important to understand this. I'll reiterate it. Today, the concept of Jewish law in civil matters is a voluntary process. Nobody is forced to keep Jewish law. It's something that you accept upon yourself, just like nobody forces you to fast on Yom Kippur. But you decide to fast on Yom Kippur to the extent that some people, if they're not feeling well, they go to their rabbi and they say, Rabbi, may I eat? It's like, Of course, no one's stopping you, but they're like, does Jewish law allow me to eat, right? Same thing. When it comes to civil law today, nobody's forcing you, unless in the very, very unusual cases where literally two people sign an arbitration agreement that we're going to go to these rabbis for arbitration, then that arbitration decision can actually be enforced in court. But in most cases, we're talking about individuals who wish to, in their daily lives, follow Jewish values and follow the Torah, and they want to be informed. What does the Torah expect of me in my dispute with my neighbor, etc. Okay.
So even in Israel, they don't.
Israel is a secular state. Israel is a secular state and has secular courts. Now, every major community does have what's called a Bet Din, a Jewish court. And again, we talked about this in great length last week. You can look at the recording. But the Bet Din does not just function on what's called Dinei Torah or court cases. I mentioned that I reached out to my colleague here in Los Angeles, the head of the Bet Din. He said on an average year, they have between 10 and 20 actual court cases in a Jewish court. Its main function is to advise people based on their expertise in Jewish business law and Jewish civil law. What does the Torah expect of you? What does the Torah expect of you? They also do other things. They do Jewish life cycles, they do divorces, they do kosher supervision. I mean, it's a whole different story. But okay, so let's look at the actual details of what we do to facilitate this person going through the process of teshuvah by returning the lost object. Text number 7. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgeda testified that there is a rabbinic enactment regarding the case of a thief that built a stolen beam into a building. The victim of the theft is only entitled to monetary compensation. This was enacted for the benefit of penitents, to allow the person, to facilitate and encourage the person to do teshuvah, which includes restitution. And if we expect of him to do the ridiculous, then he's just going to give up and not go through the process. Let's look at text number 8 for an explanation. If we require the thieves to destroy their buildings for the sake of returning the actual stolen beam, they will be discouraged from doing teshuvah. Okay? Another even further interesting example, which I think some of you might find surprising. We say furthermore, okay? Let's say you have a case where he stole something, okay? The item is still intact, which means the actual item can be returned. It can be returned. The actual item was not built into something in his house, okay? So he's going to return the actual item, but he added value to the item. The thief added value to the item while it was in his possession. Okay, let me give you an example. A thief broke into your safe and stole a piece of gold. Stole a piece of gold from your house. He took that piece of gold and created a nice piece of jewelry out of it. And so the gold might have previously been worth $1,000, and now the piece of jewelry is worth $2,000 because of the craftsmanship, because of the beautiful craftsmanship of the golden piece of jewelry. Now, he wants to do tshuva. He wants to make amends. He comes to the Jewish court. The Jewish court says, listen, you haven't built it into your house. So we're not going to tell you because it was built into your house, you don't have to give back the actual object. The Torah expects you to give back the actual object. Give back the piece of gold. He says, but 1 second. The piece of gold that I stole was $1,000. Can I just pay $1,000? And you would think biblically the answer is no. You have to give back the piece of gold. We don't care what you did with it. The rabbis were concerned if we make him do that, he's just not going to give it back. He's not going to come forward. So they said in such a case where he has to give back the actual item, if there is value added, so the victim is given 2 choices. Either you can take the piece of jewelry and pay the guy $1,000 for the value added, or you can accept the original value of the jewelry and let him keep the jewelry, of the gold, and let him keep the jewelry. Again, what were they doing? They were climbing into the mind of the criminal and thinking to themselves, when this person wants to return, when this person wants to become a better person, how can we smooth out that road for him without hurting the victim? Obviously, we're not looking to hurt the victim. Again, the victim is not going to lose out over here, okay? Because in a in a conventional court, no one would say that you have to give back the actual item. The Torah has this unique concept The actual item has to be returned. So the rabbi said, okay, no problem. The actual item has to be returned. Give him back his piece of gold. But there's value added. Let's not make the thief lose out even more so that we facilitate their coming forward. Understand? Yes, Alan.
This whole thing sounds so much.
It sounds mashugana. I know. Yes.
First of all, okay, so now he gets paid $1,000 for making something out of gold.
Correct.
What stops him from stealing something else the next time? Because all he has to do is, oh, okay, I'll give it back.
Well, there are other fines that are given to a thief when he steals something.
When he steals something.
Yeah.
That's the first time.
There are other fines that are given to a thief when he steals something. He has to pay money to the courts. He's punished in other ways. We're talking specifically here about the component of tshuva, the component of repentance, which is restitution. And what we're saying is that when it comes to restitution, although the Torah mandates giving back the actual object, in this case, we encourage the victim to accept monetary payment. If he insists on getting back the actual object as he is entitled to according to the Torah, we say to him, you got to take care of the value added. Again, I know this sounds funny that a victim should have to write a check to a thief, but again, it's an unusual case. And sometimes in Judaism, when we have these unusual cases, the right way to see them is not as an actual case, but as more of a hypothetical case teaching us a lesson. Just like we talked about capital punishment in the course about crime and consequence. And we said that in Judaism, capital punishment never happens. So why is it there, right? This question was actually posed by a Supreme Court justice in the 1960s of scholars in Israel, biblical scholars in Israel, when they were deciding capital punishment according to the Constitution. The Supreme Court was deciding capital punishment. And they wanted to know what is the biblical perspective on capital punishment. And one of the rabbis who answered this question pointed out, capital punishment never happens in Judaism. It's a hypothetical thing. So why is it there? It's there to teach you the gravity of the sin. Right? So here too, I wouldn't look at this as, well, like a victim writing a check to a thief. No, that's not what's happening. No. What's happening is Judaism is teaching us a lesson. A person did a crime. A person made a mistake. They stole something. They were dishonest. They were unloyal. They had a moral failing, whatever it is. And they want to go through the process. And they're sincere. And they're not just trying to go through an easy 1, 2, 3 so that they can benefit from being part of the community, as people were concerned about the Hungarian Nazi. Okay, and those are fair concerns. But this is a person who's being sincere. And so Judaism says to us, let's not make it more difficult than it is already. Let's try to facilitate the process. Why? Because we value every single person. We value every individual. Every person, as the Torah says, is an entire world, is an olam maleh. So listen, if you have an evil person is not going through this process. Hitler is not going through this process. Putin is not going through this process. Stalin is not going through this process. We're not talking about them. We're talking about regular people, very often regular people who had very troubled upbringings, very difficult circumstances. I'm not excusing what they do, okay? And they make terrible decisions. They make terrible choices. But now we see them on a path with a desire to truly become a better person. Says Judaism, it is a Jewish value to make that road as smooth as possible, to remove as many obstacles as possible from that road. That's the value over here. Yes. Still Meshuggah.
Okay. So somebody stole $100 from me. Stole it. I don't know who it is. 5 years later, when that $100 is no longer worth the same $100, but by investing it, he now has $500. So he goes back and he says, oh, I stole this from you, I'm giving it back to you. In the meantime, the value was going down. And the guy is way ahead.
Right. I mean, I don't,
This is the 21st century.
no, it's a fair question.
not a
I don't,
10th century.
I'm not a lawyer, but I would imagine the courts would add on interest, inflation, and make sure that you were made whole. Make sure that you were made whole, yeah.
And that's teshuva.
Well, that's restitution. That's one component of teshuva. One component of teshuva. Meaning, the point over here is not that we try to victimize the victim further. The point over here is, as the victim is being made whole, let's try to remove as many obstacles as possible along the road. That's the point over here. And it's a powerful point. It's a powerful point to take away. Yes.
One of the issues I have with this whole conversation is the voluntary aspect versus the involuntary aspect. If somebody woke up one day and they realized they lived a life that needs to change, okay, that's wonderful. I think, like our Hungarian dude here, he woke up one day and whatever forced him to have a realization that what he's been doing is wrong. It was voluntary. Versus the court system, most of that is not voluntary.
Right.
When they say, oh, and you've got to do, what is it? You got to go pick weeds on the side of the road. That's not voluntary.
Correct.
That restitution has nothing to do with the individual.
Right.
Choosing to change. And that's the kind of issues I'm having with a lot of this conversation.
So just to repeat for those who are on the computer, you're talking about tshuva. We seem to see tshuva as a voluntary process that a person goes through. And how is that facilitated by a court system, which is specifically about the law, and it's not a voluntary system? So I would first of all refer you back to last week's lesson, where we were introduced to a very interesting concept in Judaism, where agreed, it is not the role, and perhaps it would be inappropriate for the role of government to teach people morals and values. That's not government's role, okay? And it would be inappropriate for government to be teaching morals and values. So therefore, we talked last week, if you have the opportunity to do something for someone and it doesn't take anything from you, it doesn't cost you anything, right? So in America, we would call that it morally and ethically, you should probably do it, but no one's going to force you to do it. No one's going to force you to do a favor for your neighbor, okay? Judaism is not a secular government. Judaism is a value system, which we believe is a divine value system, but regardless of whether it's divine or not, its purpose, its foundational purpose is not just about functional society, it's about moral society. It's about menschlichkeit, right? We gave the example of government's job is to put lines on either side of the road to make sure you don't go out of the lines and hurt somebody else. But government's job is not to tell you where to go, where to drive. You want to drive to a nightclub, go to a nightclub. You want to drive to the marijuana store, go to the marijuana store. It's up to you. It's your business. As long as you don't hurt anybody along the way and break any laws, you can do whatever you want. You can waste your entire life watching TikTok videos. The government is not going to tell you what to do, but Judaism will tell you what to do because it's Judaism. Because Judaism has a value called, we want people to be good people. We want people to be menschlich, and therefore if a person in today's day, in the olden days where there was a society that was actually ruled by Torah courts and enforced, right? You could have, it could be involuntary. But in today's day, where a person voluntarily accepts upon themselves the values of Torah, when you accept that upon yourself, it becomes involuntary. You have to be a mensch. You have to do that favor for your neighbor, which costs you nothing, even if you don't like your neighbor. You have to, if you see your neighbor's car in danger of a branch about to fall, and it's the neighbor who's super annoying, who always drives on your little piece of grass and makes it brown, whose dog always barks too much, and you're like, let the branch fall on his Mercedes. He deserves it. And what does the Torah say? If you see your enemy's donkey tottering under its load, falling under its load, you shall help them, right? The Torah says that you have to go against your more crass human nature and be a mensch. And it's not voluntary, right? Same thing over here, okay? Where secular law stops and says, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, because otherwise society is going to be a jungle, it's going to be chaos. Judaism continues and says, and this is what you need to do to be a mensch. And this is what you need to do to help make the world into a better place. And in our discussion, this is what you need to do in order to help a former criminal become a better person. Right? So it's part of that same genre of laws. It doesn't belong in government. Okay? Yes, did we give some examples of a tax abatement, of a child surrender, of a gun buyback? In all of those cases, it's not about making people better. It's about protecting society. It's about the good of society. Again, whether it's working or not is a different story. The interest is the good of society. That's government's job. I agree. Judaism takes it a step further. And that's the values that we're discussing in this course. Let's just conclude with one final point. Okay? This is going to be a nice final point over here. The extent to which this can go. But what's interesting is in this next case, it's voluntary even according to Judaism, right? Meaning there are cases where even Judaism would say, this is what you should do, but we're not going to force you to do it. Okay? Let's look at text 12. Very, very interesting text over here, page 54. There was an incident in which a certain person sought to perform tshuva. His wife said to him, empty head, if you do tshuva, even the belt you are wearing is not yours. Meaning, this was a career thief. Everything he had was stolen. Even your clothes are stolen. Hearing this from his wife, what happened? The fellow refrained and did not do teshuvah. Terrible story. The man wanted to return, but he realized basically his entire life is going to fall apart if he comes forward. So he remained in the underworld. At that time, the sages declared that if thieves wish to return what they stole, their victims should not accept it from them. The advice, the highest level, the aspirational ethical advice is, if a man who cannot afford it took something from you, no longer has it, and wishes to do tshuva, and comes to you and says, I took $100 from you, I'm not gonna eat this week, I wanna pay you back. Judaism would not force you, but would say to you, you know what, it's okay. It's okay. Keep the money. You need it. I'm glad you're going through this process. Thank you for coming forward. It's all right.
That's exactly the problem. We can only the perpetrator, not the victim. What about if the victim really needs the money? How can we can
1 second.
You know, so we need to look at both cases.
1 second.
All those victims,
Did I say it's obligatory? It's voluntary. If the victim cannot afford it, then he doesn't have to do it. There's a reason why this was left in the optional box. You know, like when you fill out a form and they want to know where you went to high school and everything and who all your, all the details of your life, and you notice this is all optional. All you really need to put in was a phone number and an email, right? Everything else was optional, right? This is optional. It's aspirational. It's important. If you can do it, it's a good thing to do, but it's optional, okay? Let's look at 13, just to get a little more detail over here. When established thieves, career criminals for whom tshuva is difficult, right? This was not a one-time where he was tempted and he stole $100. This guy's entire existence is one of dishonesty. And they wish to do tshuva on their own initiative, then if the stolen items are no longer extant, their victims should not accept compensation from them. This is to ensure that such thieves will not be deterred from doing tshuva. Again, the Torah is not telling us what to do. This is aspirational. Text 13. However, if the thieves insist that they wish to go beyond the letter of the law and pay compensation, the victims are not cautioned against accepting it. So essentially what he's clarifying is, it's not that you have to refuse the person giving you the money. It's that if you're able to afford it, don't pressure them to pay you back. Meaning, let's say you have someone who stole from the entire community, literally, okay? He stole from the whole community. He's a bad person. Little money, relatively small amounts from many, many people. And you hear, wow, he's back on the right path. And I heard he paid back so-and-so. So you text him, you say, hey, I heard you're paying back. Don't forget, you owe me $100, right? This is where the Torah is saying, if you can afford it, don't do that. Don't do that. He's trying. Now, if he comes to you and says, you know what? Here's $100. I managed to get $100. I worked overtime. Here's $100. You don't have to refuse. So this text 13 is clarifying. Text 13, by the way, is the Code of Jewish Law. Text 12 is the Talmud. Let me just put this in historical perspective. The Talmud is 4th century. The Code of Jewish Law is 16th century. So it's a much more recent clarification of how the original statement of the Talmud was understood and implemented. Okay, so it's important. This is the more practical way this idea is implemented. But I think it helps us again understand, at least aspirationally, where the Torah would like our heads to be when it comes to facilitating another person's return. The main point that I wanted to again reiterate is that although secular law does have similar things, like we talked about in the beginning, right? The amnesty, the gun buyback, but that's about the good of society. That's about rights, as we discussed in lesson 1, right? We're here to protect other people's rights. And so in order to protect the baby, we're going to let the mother go. In order to protect society, we're going to let the criminal go, let him drop off his machine gun. Okay? But it's not that we're laser focused on the good of the criminal or the path or the healthy path of the mother. Right? And that's not necessarily government's job, but that is Judaism's job. That's exactly what Judaism is trying to do. That when you see someone, and sometimes that someone who you're seeing is a little bit yourself, you see maybe a part of yourself, a slice of your life where a mistake was made. Know that the Torah cares about that person who you see and cares about that slice of your life where you made a mistake, and wishes to help you along the path of not just rehabilitation, but of reaching the greatest spiritual heights that are possible through the mitzvah of tshuva, through the mitzvah of repentance. Okay? So I think it's a very, very powerful message. Hopefully it's a positive takeaway. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a very, very interesting course, a very, very interesting discussion next week. I hope you all are going to join us. Let me just remind myself. I know that it's interesting as I started reading it, but I'm trying to remember which one it is. Next week, I'm trying to remember what it was. But okay, the responsibilities that we have towards protecting others who are being victimized. Okay, getting involved when someone else is in danger, getting involved when someone else is going to be hurt, being a good Samaritan. Okay, we're going to talk about that, contrast that between Jewish law and secular law. Please join us next week. Looking forward to seeing you. Please join us as well this Thursday evening. We have our Lag BaOmer celebration, a very beautiful holiday. Look forward to seeing everyone. Have a wonderful day, wonderful evening. Sei gesund, everyone. Oy, 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 oy.